first thing I want to do is take off the wheel, 21mm socket, take off all 6 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. If your wheel is stuck on like this one, go ahead and start a lug nut on, and then hammer from the backside. Make sure you hit the tire, not the rim. This is going to prevent it from flying off when it finally breaks free. All right, now take this off and remove your wheel. Next, I want to take off these 2 17mm bolts to remove the caliper off the bracket. Okay, leave that one in just a couple threads. Perfect. Now remove them both. Set those aside, and then you can take the caliper and flip it up and over. Make sure it doesn't put any pressure on the brake hose. Now you can remove your old pads. I'll take them apart, I guess, first. And do the same to this one. Next thing you want to do is remove these 2 17mm bolts. There's one. Take this one off as well. Now you can take the bracket completely off. And next thing to do is to take the rotor off. So because this is super rusty, I sprayed it with some rust penetrant in all these holes in hopes to break it free, and well, it either worked or it was already broken free. I'm going to wiggle the rotor off. The parking brake shoes are the only thing holding it on at this point. Perfect. The next thing I want to do is clean off all of this dust that's in here. I don't want to breathe it in. I don't want to get it airborne. So with some brake parts cleaner, spray it all down. Don't be afraid to use too much, because you definitely don't want to breathe this brake dust in. Go ahead and clean up the hub. This one's not in too bad of condition, so I'm just going to use a wire brush. Sometimes they're really rusty and you're going to have to use a little sanding disc and sand off the rust. But basically what you want to get is a nice clean flat surface for the new rotor to sit on, because if you have rust chunks or rust buildup, it'll sit at an angle. Slightly, you won't be able to see it, but it will, and then you'll have braking issues. So make sure it's all clean. It doesn't have to be shiny, but it does have to be free of debris. And once it looks about like that, I'm going to take some anti-seize and spray it on. Try not to get it on the brake shoes. What this is going to do is it's going to prevent the rotor from seizing onto the hub here, and it's going to prevent rust from building up in the future. At this point, if you had a non-performance rotor, a flat one, you'll notice it's coated with oil. So the way I like to do that is put it on backwards, spray it with brake parts cleaner, and wipe it down. I don't have that one. This is a special coating for the performance one, so I can just slide it right on. Before you go any further, you typically want to adjust the parking brake. So as you can see, this one's very loose right here. The rotor just keeps on spinning, and I don't even hear it engage. So if you go down here, you'll see a little wheel, star wheel adjuster down here. You'll have to turn this one. Let's see which way. If you turn this one down, it'll expand the shoes and it'll make them engage on the rotor. So go a little bit at a time. You don't want to go too much. Okay, I still have to keep going. But basically what you want is just to hear these shoes touch up against the rotor. And once you hear that, then you know it's properly adjusted. All right, let's see what that does. Okay, so you hear that? That's what you want. It's still spinning freely, but they're just barely touching. That's exactly what you want, so let's move on. Take your slider pins, clean up the old grease. If you need to use some brake parts cleaner, go ahead and do that. Or wire brush them if you want. But whatever you do, get the old grease off. If they're extremely rotted, like if your caliper pin was seized in there and you got it out and now it's extremely rusty, you definitely want to inspect it and make sure it's not too pitted, because if it is, you should replace it. Mine are in good condition, so there's nothing to worry about here. I'm going to actually put a little bit of extra grease in here. I like to put it right in the boot. That's going to act as a reserve of grease, basically. I'm going to put some on the slider pins too, but a lot of it will come off as I try to insert them, so this is just going to be, like I said, a reserve. The next thing you want to do is remove these little retainer clips, or anti-rattle clips I should say, and we have new ones. Now remember how they go. They have these hooks that slide on or go on the outer part of the caliper. If they were to go on the inside, they'd hit the rotor, so you just want to make sure you remember that for reinstallation. And typically you don't want to reuse these. Your kit should come with new ones. Now because this one is not in too bad of condition, I can just take my wire brush and scrape off all the rust that's that built up here. Usually if it's extremely pitted and has a lot of raised areas, you'd want to either sand it down or grind it, do whatever you have to do. But basically you want to get it as clean as possible. And once it's good, take a very small amount of grease and coat this area where the anti-rattle clips go. That's going to prevent rust from building up in the future. And you don't need a lot, because if you put too much on, it's going to squeeze into the middle here. It'll get on your rotor, and you don't want to have a greasy rotor. So, now that that's greased up, take your new anti-rattle clips, find the correct one, and press it down and on. Make sure it locks in. If you need to persuade it a little bit, do the same to this one. And again, make sure they line up. This one did not line up correctly. It has this little ear on the inside that needs to hook on. Alright, now it's fully seated. And do the same to this one. Hook it onto the inside part first. Press it down. Make sure it's fully seated, and do the same to this one. Go ahead and line up your caliper bracket, and I cleaned up the threads on these bolts. If you wanted to use some thread locker, go ahead and do so. If not, definitely don't put any grease or anti-seize on the threads, just leave them be as is. Okay, bottom these out and then torque them to 65 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now let's get the pads in. Sometimes it's a little tricky to line them up. You have to press inward that way, but also inward this way at the same time. Perfect. Make sure that when they're in, they can easily move. All right. Now I have a new caliper here, but if you still had your old one after you cleaned it and the pads don't easily slide in and out, that means you didn't clean it enough. There's still rust build up there, and what's happening is their pads are being compressed in. They're going to get squished up against the rotor when you first brake, and they're going to just stick there, and then you're going to overheat your brakes and you have issues. So make sure they slide easily in and out. Now, for your old caliper, you'd need to compress it. However, mine is seized, which is why I have a new caliper. But if you were to compress it, just use a tool, C-clamp, large pliers, whatever you have. Very slowly and evenly press the piston in. If it doesn't go in easily, if it requires a lot of force, or if it doesn't go in at all, you need a new caliper. Go ahead and install your caliper onto the bracket here. Make sure it lines up with the boots. Slide in your slider pins and start them on. Okay, bottom them out and then torque them to 65 foot-pounds. Awesome. Go ahead and get the wheel on. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we'll torque them to 83 foot-pounds. Torque these to 83 foot-pounds.